Hello, and welcome to Empathy in Motion, the power of employee volunteering. My name is Chris Jarvis. I'm with Realize Worth, and today we're going to talk about hacks for planning and managing volunteer events. So we're going to look at timeline and expectations, and then we're going to examine how to scope a project and find a good partner. We're going to think about managing volunteers, and then we're going to explore a handful of straight-up hacks that'll help you get through and be successful. So let's start with our event planning timeline. You can see a sample on the screen. It can be difficult sometimes to get nonprofits to nail down a date for a volunteer event. It's also challenging at times to organize events when you have a job, a life, a family. And honestly, this is a volunteer role. That's why this timeline is over a 4-month period. Now, when it comes to your event planning timeline, the idea is to be realistic and generous to your mom, to your kids. No, to you. Be generous to you so you can enjoy this role and do it well. On the other hand, if you already have a relationship with a nonprofit, meaning you've been volunteering there a lot, or you donate, or you understand them and know them, or maybe it just so happens that there are a lot of options in your area to choose from, you can condense this timeline as much as you're comfortable with. So let's talk through it briefly. Before you set a date for your event, spend the first few weeks connecting with local organizations that might have a mutually beneficial volunteer activity for you and your volunteer team. Now, by mutually beneficial, we mean it's good for them and it's good for you, and your volunteer team is going to be into it. You need to have a conversation with those organizations to learn about what their needs are, help them identify how you might be able to benefit them, and get an idea for how many people they need. If you're volunteering through your company, hopefully they provided you scoping guidelines to help with this conversation in a toolkit or a policy manual or even online. The timeline you see on your screen gives you and the nonprofit time to hold the event about 6 to 8 weeks from the date of your initial conversation. Use the time to prepare yourself, to prepare the nonprofit, and to prepare your volunteers. Show up to the event ready to provide a great experience and the potential for transformation. So, in summary, here are a few quick tips for scoping a volunteer event. First, your partner. Approach nonprofit organizations as partners. Seek to understand their needs, their objectives, and their limitations, and help them understand yours. 2, this is project management. Some nonprofits or NGOs will not have time to help you help them. They have limited resources. The executive director is also the custodian and the volunteer manager. So plan to project manage the event details yourself and with the help of other volunteers. Don't place this responsibility on the organization and expect them to come through for you. Own what needs to be done. And 3, prepare. Always prepare the nonprofit for the transformative framing of your event. We talk a lot about it in these sessions. The transformative framing is absolutely essential and will probably not be understood by many nonprofits, even though intuitively they know what you're talking about. Best case scenario, someone from the organization will join you for the brief and explain the purpose of the work. Worst case scenario, you prepare beforehand, understand what's going on and who you're helping, and how to frame that conversation for your peers when you go to the event. In addition to these tips, also remember to give yourself time to build a team. Go beyond the people who typically volunteer, the folks who show up at the same or different events over and over again. Think about which of your colleagues might benefit from volunteering. And delegate, which is much easier to say than do, believe me. But ask regular participants, people who volunteer or people who may be coming out, to take on a different role of inviting 1 or 2 other people who aren't regular volunteers and who might come out for the first time to participate in this experience. After each event, it's important to report on the results. But what exactly do you report on? Be sure to follow the guidelines your company provides and use any technology tool they've offered to be able to track participation and any other metrics that they feel is important. It may be sending in an email or filling out an Excel sheet, but providing this data will make your program stronger. All right, let's pause for a second. It's great to imagine planning events on a perfect timeline. It's great to think you'll have time to spend long hours in the evening over a glass of wine just thinking and mentally preparing for how to give your volunteers a fantastic experience. It's all planned out, It's all going to be perfect. But what really happens is that one of your kids gets sick and you have to take some time off. And then your boss gives you a ton of extra work to make up for. Your volunteers, they're all ready to go. But they haven't heard any details from you because you're preoccupied. And that's partly your fault, but then it's also partly because the nonprofit keeps changing some of the details or doesn't let you in on details you didn't even know to ask about. All of a sudden, it's 4 days before the event and everyone's asking for something and you just want to tell them all that they're lucky any event is happening at all. Relax. All right. Our expectations are almost always different than reality, especially when we're talking about working with nonprofits and volunteering. Those are fluid situations, it's voluntary actions, and things come up. So it's okay. Sometimes things will go smoothly, and then sometimes not so much. So keep the following principles in mind, all right? Number one, participation is only one success metric, and it is not always the most important one. If you end up with just a few volunteers, remember, we are measuring multiple impacts over a longer period of time. Sometimes a few volunteers get us to greater impacts than a whole pile of people volunteering together. Number two, expect to be flexible and adaptable. Try not to stress too much. Things change. People request impossible things in impossible timeframes, and sometimes they cancel or don't show up at the last minute. If you go in thinking that this might happen, you'll be better off. No worries. We're playing the long game here. We're looking for results way down the road, not only for the community, the company, but individuals themselves. And number three, don't forget to delegate tasks as much as possible. I know. It's easier said than done. Just saying to delegate doesn't mean it's going to happen. But this is good for you and it's good for the development of your volunteers. Remember, we're trying to meet people at their highest level of contribution. And so giving people more of a place, more of a role to play in this whole process is part of what we're trying to achieve together. Finally, let's admit it, event planning is hard. So let yourself off the hook. When things don't go perfectly, take it easy. Just relax. Catch your breath. Get support where it's available and work together to come up with solutions to try again. Remember, events are meant to be fun, and you can let yourself have fun too. You can be responsible and still have a good time, and that's the goal. Okay, another thing to remember as a volunteer event leader, you're not actually there to do all the tasks. You weren't asked to play this role because you're a super volunteer. You're there to lead other volunteers, to set the stage, to meet people at their highest level of contribution. If you listen to the unit, The Journey of the Volunteer, you understand there are 3 stages in the journey of a volunteer. Once we do the brief, kind of set expectations, we want to go around and talk to people. Find out if they're there for the first time, if they volunteer very often. Are they a tourist? Which is totally okay. That's where we all start. Maybe they're a traveler. They're finding that they're getting something out of it. Stage 2. They need to be met at a slightly different level. Or maybe stage 3. They've been volunteering for 20 years. They've come out to your event, and that's a really good thing. You want to discover where people are and have a conversation that meets them at that level. And finally, here are some hacks we can use when things go wrong at our volunteering event. Number 1, people are going to show up late. Just count on it. Why? Because most people who attend aren't coming because they are in love with the volunteering event or community or cause. They're coming because someone asked them to come or some other reason. So they're going to show up a little bit late. Things are going to arise, schedules are going to conflict, and they're going to arrive late. Here's the problem with that. You want to do a brief before everybody gets volunteering. You want to set the stage. You want to frame it. You want to tell people the why of what we're doing. That's critical to transformative volunteering. But if people show up late, they're going to miss it. So here's what you do. Plan to do your brief 30 minutes after you schedule the time to start the volunteering event. And as people show up, tell them when and where you're going to do that brief. So people can show up, pick up a small task to do. The nonprofit can help you send people around the building or the grounds to get started in the work as soon as they arrive. But then 30 minutes later, you all convene on one location at that time to do the brief. So that solves that problem. Number 2, it's weird to walk around and tell everybody else what they should be doing, right? You're in this role to make sure that everybody is able to make a contribution, that everybody knows how to participate, that if they're standing around not doing something because they're there for the first time, you're there to ensure that they have something to do, they have the tools to do it, and they've got a place to make that contribution. But it can be strange to walk up to people and say, hey, go stack chairs, hey, go sweep this, hey, go paint that, especially if they're peers or even worse, supervisors, or heaven forbid, it's your executive who showed up. Walking up to your executive and saying, hey buddy, can you go grab the shovel and do some mulch shoveling over there, is not going to come naturally. But that's your job, to make sure everybody has something to do. They'll stand around and talk and you'll think, oh, that's fine, they're having a good time. They're not. They don't hate it, but they don't think they're making a contribution. So here's what you do. We call it the milk method. You grab something and you put it in your hands. This is where it came from at a community meal. I told my friend, grab a jug of milk and a sleeve of cups. Walk up to those volunteers and say, hey, would you mind grabbing a broom and sweeping over there? It's really important to gesture with the milk as well. Like I would, but I got the milk and the cups and I'm so... It solves it completely. You can tell anybody to do anything because the milk, you would, but the milk, but be sure to gesture with the milk and lean in. That helps too. That's number 2. Number 3, what if the nonprofit wants to skip the framing process, the brief and the debrief? What if they don't understand or they just didn't show up because something came up? Go in planning on it. If you take the time through the scoping process and the setting objectives process to understand why this matters, the significance of the task, and who you're helping, you can marry that easily to what you're going to do and how you're going to get it done. It's critically important as you're standing in that semicircle in the brief that you're able to paint a picture of who you're helping and how what you're going to do is able to help them. You can typically gain this insight from doing some research beforehand, but we recommend plan for that. You'll never be disappointed. And what if no one understands transformative volunteering? Don't worry, they won't. That's not the point, to explain everything from the brief to the debrief to sense making to bringing meaning to your experience to cognitive dissonance. That's not the essential part. The essential part is planning an event where those things take place. So focus on the steps that you need to take, the keystone behaviors, the understanding that you need to have at the level that you're able to, and offer a great experience for people. Remember, the point is to allow people to fall in love with volunteering and this activity and come back and try it again. So what if everything goes wrong? Again, it's likely to. This is volunteering and you're dealing with limited budgets, limited resources, limited time, and everybody else has other things going on. Remember, situational motivation and other priorities. It's okay. The most important thing to remember is that you did your best, and give yourself some grace. Be generous to yourself and don't give up. You're offering something really important to people, something that can be absolutely transformative. Don't give up when things go wrong. Just say things may go wrong and that's all right. Someone will be there to help you from your team. And those were some hacks for managing and planning volunteer events. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you right here next time.